Now let's look at this first example. Now, if I take a 7 and I square it, I get a 49. If I take a -7 and I square it, I also get the same number, 49. So whether you square a +7 or a -7, your answer is always going to be a positive 49. So you've seen this before. If I go x squared equals 49 and I say what is x, which means find x or solve for x, then x equals either plus or minus the square root of 49. You've seen this before when you did quadratic equations. Now, x can be equal to the positive radical 49 or x can be equal to the negative radical 49. And what is radical 49? If I square 7, I get a 49. So the positive square root of 49 is 7. And the negative square root is -7. But when you see this radical sign, we're only looking at the positive square root of 49, which is 7. Now let's look at negative radical 49. So it's the negative of radical 49, which is equal to -7. But this is important. If the negative is inside the radical sign, and this is the square root, the positive square root of -49, remember that this is undefined, and this is something you have to remember. The negative inside the radical sign tells you it is undefined. There's no such thing. And if you ever have any doubt, enter it into your calculator and see what you get. The negative cannot be under the radical sign if we're talking about the positive square root. Now, if you want to think of now, one way in which you can think about this exact same problem, it's the negative radical 49. So this is the negative square root. So technically that's the square root of 49. And you can think of it as the negative of 49 to the power of half. And that's equal to the -7 squared to the half. And if you remember the rules of exponents, I'm going to write it on the side. One of the rules says a to the m whole to the n is a to the m times n. And if I go a squared the whole cubed, it's equal to a to the 2 times 3. This is the only time that we multiply exponents. So this is equal to -7 to the 2 times half. Cancel the 2's and you get -7. The same thing here. Positive square root of 49 is equal to positive 49 to the half. The square root coincides with an exponent to the half. And then we have 7 squared to the half. So you multiply the 2. And the reason why I cancelled it, let me not skip that step. And the reason why I cancelled it is because this is 7 squared to the half, which is equal to 7 to the 2 times half. And that's equal to 7 to the 1. That's 7. Now in the previous example, we've seen that the square root of 7 squared is equal to 7. And you can think of it as the square root cancelling off the square and leaving a 7. Or I suggested another way of looking at it. I said, let's think of this as 49 to the power of half, and that's equal to 7 squared to the power of half. And when you think of the rule of exponents, it's 7 to the power of 2 times half, which is equal to 7 to the 1. Now let's look at what a cube root. So when you have a 3 inside this, it's called the cube root. So we have the cube root of 8. So just like the 2 and the square root canceled each other out, if you can think of 8 as 2 times 2 times 2, if you break it down completely into its prime factorization, then you would, into its prime factors, so you would get the cube root of 2 cubed. Remember, the cube root and the cube kind of cancel each other out, and you're left with a 2. Now let's double check. If I take a 2 and I cube it, I get 8. So the cube root of 2 cubed is equal to 2. When I square 2, I get a 4. So the square root of 2 squared is equal to 2. Now cube root, another way of looking at it, is 2 cubed to the 1/3. And then that's equal to 2 to the 3 times 1/3. And that's equal to 2 to the 1. So let's look at this problem. It's the cube root of 27. I'm going to break down the 27 into its prime factors. So 27 is equal to 9 times 3. Break the 9 down further. It's 3 times 3 times 3. So we have the cube root of 3 cubed. This is 3 to the power of 3. Now the cube root and the cube kind of cancel each other out, and you get your answer as 3. Now in square roots, it was a little different when it came to the square root of a negative number. So if we have the square root of a -4, for example, that's undefined, because you cannot have a negative inside the square root sign. So the positive square root of -4 is undefined. However, and why is it undefined? Because you can never square a negative number to get a negative number. If you square a negative number, it always becomes positive. So let's look at this. The cube root of, let's say, a -8. So basically, what I'm looking for is there a number that I can cube to get a -8? And the answer is absolutely. When you cube a negative number, you get a negative number. When you cube a positive number, you get a positive number. It's not the case for a square. When you square a positive number, you do get a positive number. If I go 2 squared, I do get a 4, which is positive. But when I go -2 squared, I do not get a negative number. I get a positive number. That's the difference between taking a cube root of a negative number and a square root of a negative number. A square root of a negative number is undefined, but the cube root of a negative number is negative. So let's look at the cube root of negative 27. How do I get a negative 27? By cubing a negative 3. And the cube root and the cube cancel each other out. And what I get is a negative 3. But a square root of a negative number is undefined. Now, a negative square root, or rather a negative cube root, keep the negative outside. It doesn't bother any of these processes. But if the negative is inside, you have to just stop and think for a second. So if you have the negative cube root of 3 cubed, which is 27, then you get a negative 3. So we'll look at another way, the exact same problem. So I'm going to go over this one. So the cube root of 27 is, you can think of it as 27 to the 1/3. Not the whole cubed, but 1/3. It's the cube root. It's the opposite of cubing. So I'm going to do 3 cubed is 27. That's the prime factorization in the exponential form to the 1/3. And by rule of exponents, I'm allowed to multiply the 3 and the 1/3. And I get 3 to the 1. Remember, the cube root of a negative number does exist. Okay, you can take the cube root of a negative number. As long as this number is odd, you can take the cube root of a negative number. So you go negative 27 is equal to negative 3, the whole cubed, whole to the 1/3. Remember, this translates to, the cube root translates to 1/3. So negative 3 to the power of 3 times 1/3 is equal to negative 3. We are able to do this because we know that the cube root of a negative number is negative. Just like the 5th root, because 5 is an odd number, of a negative number, let's say 5 cubed, or 5 to the 5th power, sorry, is, these two cancel each other out and you get a negative number. This works only when the roots are of odd numbers. The cube root is like the 3rd root, the 5th root, the 7th root, and so on. But if it's the 2nd root, which is the square root, the 4th root, the 6th root, and so on, doesn't work. It's undefined when the inside is a negative number. So let's just do one more. The cube root of 0.008. So we can think of 008 as 0.2 the whole cubed. So 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2 is equal to 0.008. There are 3 decimal places, and 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. So that is to the 1/3, because it's the cube root, and we get 0.2.